Welcome to another edition of Simons Says, a podcast devoted to conversationalists and the curious-minded. Here's your host, me, the follically challenged Dave Simons, certified financial planner and all-around nice guy. All right, welcome everybody for another edition of the Simons Says podcast. So I'm going to start off by taking us back, I guess, in a time machine back a little bit, a ways back. And it's August of 1974, all right? I'm 12 years old. And I'm in the car with my grandparents, my mom's parents. They're from Texas. They were up visiting us here in St. Louis. And they were taking little old Dave for a little summer vacation trip back to their place in hill country of Texas, outside of Austin, in a small town outside there. And got to leave my little baby siblings behind. So this was great. I got to spend some time traveling down 44 into Texas for this first time with my grandparents. But you know, in that entire period, there's only one thing I really remember with clarity. And it's the weirdest thing. It had nothing to do with the trip. We stopped in Tulsa for the night, some little motel off the side of the highway. And my grandparents had this little black and white TV that was on in the motel room. And there was the President of the United States talking about quitting tomorrow. And I remembered this. The one thing I remember about this entire trip, and I remember my little 12-year-old mind saying, he can do that? The president, the most powerful man in the world, can actually just say, I'm done. I'm out of here. And when I look back, and I really kind of point to that one time as my foray into my interest in politics, because that was so intriguing to me, that singular moment, that I started to follow politics even more. And it also helped that my dad was a American history professor, a college professor, a PhD, wrote some books. Strange aside to that is my dad also wrote a couple of American history books that we used in one of my history college courses at Mizzou. So I come by my love of history and politics very naturally through college and beyond. And then coincidentally, because I'm a broadcast journalism major originally, my first beat that was given to me as a young cub reporter for the CBS television news affiliate in Wichita was the political beat. And I dove right into it. I loved it. It was government politics, obviously local politics, but state. So I got to know Bob Dole on basically a first name basis there throughout the 80s. And I loved it. Of course, as many of you know, my career went a different path and I got into the world of finance. But my love of politics and the fact that I'm a political junkie has never gone away. And I really do look to that moment when I saw the president resigning. And that was just so intriguing to me, the people around it, that the process of politics, the people that were drawn to it. And that brings me to today, a couple of gentlemen that I'm glad to know on a professional, if not friendly basis, and that is John Hancock and Michael Kelley. Now, those of you in the St. Louis area, perhaps you already know those two names. It's this dynamic duo of Hancock and Kelley, right? Many of you know them after years being on KMOX radio here in St. Louis, on television, the Fox 2 News affiliate, the Fox affiliate here in St. Louis. But even if you're not from the St. Louis area and you don't know these two gentlemen at all, I really think that you're going to be intrigued by the discussions that I will have in these two episodes. They have been gracious enough to allow me to separate them. They're kind of joined at the hip somewhat professionally, at least in the eyes of the media, but I'm separating them because I really want to take time and dig into their background, each of them. Why did one choose to become more on the GOP side? Why is one more considered a Democrat or a progressive? And yet, here's the catch to all this. They're best friends. And we're told today that can't really happen. I mean, maybe it used to happen that way, but in today's environment, which is full of vitriol, right? You're supposed to almost hate the person on the other side. So I think we can learn from these two gentlemen, but for now, I've separated them. So let me just say with the disclaimer here, If you haven't yet seen my interview with Michael Kelley, I certainly encourage you to do that. And if you have, and you're now coming over here to watch the talk with John Hancock, welcome. So without further ado, a man who is well known in the circles of politics here in the state of Missouri, my guest today on Simon Says, John Hancock. Welcome, John.
Hey, David, good to be here. I was 10 on that August day when Richard Nixon resigned.
Do you remember anything about it?
Yeah, I watched it on television.
Yep. So you're a couple years behind me, which means the first year I could vote was 1980. So I did vote in that election.
Yep.
So I guess 84?
82. The midterms.
So in 84, were you already kind of in Republican politics?
Yeah.
So you're a Reagan guy back then.
Yeah, very much so, yeah.
Well, tell me about well, wait a minute. Before we even do, a lot of people who are not from St. Louis and don't know you two, I know many of them are going to say, John Hancock, that's kind of a famous name politically. It's like when you were born, John, it's like the universe demanded that you had to go into politics.
Well, actually, it was my mother, her sister, my Aunt Totsy. She married Tim Kennedy. And they had a son in 1962, and they named him John Kennedy. And,
oh, my goodness.
So my mother, it was sibling rivalry. It was just she and her sister. So there was no doubt that when she got pregnant and had me, I was going to be John Hancock.
Is that right?
Exactly.
I did not know that story. So John Kennedy.
Yeah, is my cousin. And his older brother, Bob.
You're kidding.
I'm not kidding you.
So what are those two doing?
John just retired. He was a painter.
Okay.
House painter. And then Bob owned a number of businesses over the years, and they both are still in town.
Okay. So when did you get your love for politics? Did that come earlier or later?
My mom had me working the polls for Ed Dowd for governor in 1972, so I would have been 8. Ed Dowd was a Democrat running against Kit Bond at the time for governor. And my parents were Democrats. They were really Roosevelt Democrats. And so I did that. I enjoyed it. I remember very vividly the whole Tom Eagleton kerfuffle in 1972 when he was picked by George McGovern to be vice president. And then my favorite word that I learned when I was 8 years old was flabbergasted. He was flabbergasted. And I thought that was the greatest word ever. And so I kind of followed. And then the Watergate hearings after school, coming home and watching on Channel 9, the Watergate hearings every afternoon, fascinated by it. By 1977, I guess I'd have been 13. I was working on the citizenship and the community merit badge, and for the Boy Scouts. And you've got to get a local government budget. That's one of the requirements to take to your merit badge counselor and talk about public finance. So just so happened that my neighbor, 6 houses away, was running in a special election for state representative because there was a vacancy, and he came and he knocked on the door. My mother said, my son needs a budget. And so he took notes and came back the next day with the budget of the city of Creve Coeur. And I was impressed by that, and my mom said, you ought to volunteer on his campaign. He was a Republican. Mm-hmm. So his name was Steve Banton. And so every day after school in 1977, for those couple of months, we'd go out and knock on doors, and we'd have a contest to see which one of us could get more yard sign locations. And I loved it. I loved meeting the voters. I loved everything. But I had not really formed any political worldview at that point. But Steve was a nice guy, and he won. So I started volunteering on his campaigns. He had to run again the very next year in 1978, and I was big time volunteer on that campaign from the very beginning. We lost that one. Rough year, 78. And then, I was kind of in it, enjoyed it, but I never really thought I would do it professionally.
So you started out at Mizzou, journalism.
Yeah. So
right?
I started out at UMSL as a music major, and did that for a year. And I had a bunch of college credits from high school. So I got accepted into the journalism school my second semester sophomore year at Mizzou. And it's the first time I'd ever lived away from home that year. And let me just say, I sowed a lot of wild oats. I could have been a wheat farmer out there.
Oh my gosh.
And
put that way.
And so, long story short, the journalism school asked me not to come back. I was doing 90-second sportscast on KCOU, where the emphasis is on you. They're in the basement at Graham Hall. And I finished my sportscast at about 68 seconds. I've got time to kill here. What are you going to do?
That's scary.
Well, it was, but I knew exactly what I was going to do because I grew up listening to Robert Hyland give his editorial comments on KMOX every day. And now for an editorial comment, I said.
Oh, no. Unsolicited.
The Missouri Tigers lost again to Nebraska by a score, I don't know what, 42-6, some ridiculous score. And marking the 5th consecutive year that the Cornhuskers have beat our Tigers. Warren Powers, the coach of Missouri, is not getting the job done. It is time for Warren Powers to go. That was my editorial comment. And instead of Warren Powers going, it was me.
Oh, my gosh. You got some fill in the blank to be able to do that as a young college student, because as someone who was there, holy cow, that's something else. I will tell you that when I was there, just a couple of years ahead of you, going through journalism, there was another person let go, and I'll tell you what she said on the air.
Yeah.
She thought it was clever to say over a tragedy.
Yeah.
And she said, so-and-so was driving their old Buick really fast to beat the train. The train was coming this way. They tied.
Oh.
And you could hear kind of a little giggle.
Yeah.
She wasn't invited back either.
Right. Yeah, well, I didn't do that.
Gosh,
I just fired the football coach.
Oh my gosh! Well, and he was fired. So
you
were ahead.
Yeah, I was ahead of my time.
You were ahead of your time.
No doubt.
So where did you go then?
So I came back to UMSL, and I got into political science. And I had one professor in particular, and he was a public budgeting professor. And this was 1984. So Ronald Reagan is running for president for re-election. And I was always interested in politics. And so when I came back home, and I was living at home with mom and dad, and I got right back into volunteering on campaigns. And in my class with this professor, he had us predict the Electoral College outcome. And, I don't like to talk, Dave, but I nailed it.
Did you really?
Yeah. It was the Reagan against Mondale campaign in 84. Yeah. And I think Mondale won Minnesota and the District of Columbia, and that was it. So I nailed it.
So do you remember, I guess you would have done a lot of research on that, because you just probably didn't pull a number out of your head. You really had to study this.
Oh, yeah. And I had some great professors over there. Terry Jones, who's still with us, great guy.
Okay.
And then by the time I graduated, I ended up running the campaign for my then state representative, who I had interned with as well in college. So I got to know him a little bit. And I got accepted into a graduate program at Rutgers in politics and public policy, which was a great training ground, because they actually taught politics, like how to poll and how to, it was great, and a lot of public policy stuff too. And the plan at that point was to become a college professor, like your dad.
Yeah, right.
And came back, and I was working on my doctorate back at UMSL, and my state representative, whose campaign I had run in 1986, called one day and he said, "I'm not running again. Would you like to run?" And I thought, wow.
You're like 22 years old.
I'm 23.
23, yeah.
You got to be 24. He said, "Will you be 24 by the election?" Yeah. And he said, "Well, think about it. If you want to do it, I'm for you." And so that was something. And George Hoblitzell, the late George Hoblitzell, he was really kind of a liberal Republican in the Rockefeller kind of tradition that existed back in those days. He was very pro-choice on abortion, stridently so. And I kind of shared those general views, at that point. And so, but in the meantime, I became a committed Christian, which I hadn't been. And so I'm all these changes going on, and I'm still too young to. My father said it's a good thing you ran when you thought you knew everything. So, so I'm going through all these changes, and all of my political views began to comport with my faith. And Ronald Reagan had a huge influence on me in terms of fiscal conservatism, reducing the size of government, investing in defense, cutting taxes for people. All of those things appealed to me greatly. And so anyway, I ended up running and I got elected.
Did you really? So at this time, because you're talking about your dad and your family, I know that your dad was kind of joking about some of that,
Yeah.
but how did they really take the fact, as you said, that they were active in Democrat politics? And
Well, my
now
mom was.
Your mom was,
Yeah.
at least. But then you are now a Republican. You're helping Republicans get elected. You get elected on the GOP ticket where they're like, oh, we're proud of you, son. Or, yeah, we're kind of proud of you, but why did you pick that side?
No.
How did they respond?
They came right over. So Dad had voted, well, they both voted for Carter in 76, coming out of Watergate. And by the time 1980 came around, so after Nixon, Dad said, I'll never, because he voted for Nixon. He said, I'll never vote for another Republican. I remember at the dinner table one night, and then Carter was president, and 1980 comes, and Dad says, I'm never going to vote for another Democrat.
The so-called Reagan Democrats, though,
Yes,
right?
very much so.
That's who they were.
Very much so. And they were conservative people. I mean, they, very frugal. We didn't have a lot. But they raised the kids. It was a, traditional middle-class American household, And so they were both, by the time I was running, they were both pretty solid conservative Republicans.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Because usually it's the other way around. The parents have the influence on their kid, and maybe the kid stays within the family politics or he goes astray.
Yeah.
This podcast is about you. I won't go into a lot of detail about me, but that's what happened. I went astray according to my parents and
Right.
went to the other side. But in your case, your parents kind of naturally follow the son.
Well, and I've wondered a lot of times, because I got involved at 13. I didn't know. I mean, I knew even less at 13 than I did at 24, Dave.
Yeah.
And, I've often wondered if that neighbor had been a Democrat and I would have volunteered in that campaign, what trajectory would that have taken me? And because I did not have a well-formed worldview at all at that point. Now, eventually I did, and found myself very comfortable in the Republican Party, and felt that way for a long time.
You make an interesting point about your newfound faith and how that aligned with some of the political views you were forming, and they kind of came together at the same time. Outside of that, what else really, when you think about this, what appeals to you on the conservative side of things versus maybe something that's a little bit more liberal or progressive?
Yeah, and I've got, as I've aged, I've gotten somewhat nuanced on a lot of things. But as a matter of general principle, I do believe that we all strive to be free, and that personal liberty is a huge part of a successful, well-lived life. And I think the Conservative Party offers more individual liberty generally than people. That's changing some. But that was a big part of it. I think reducing the size of government generally is a good thing, so that probably the president that most reflects my thinking is Calvin Coolidge. And
how so?
Well, he spent every day of his presidency cutting government. He had the guy, this is before we even we just passed the budget, the unified budget under Harding. That was in 1921. So now that we have a federal budget for the first time. And he had one office dedicated to finding, it could be pencils. We don't need this many pencils over, at Commerce.
Seems so quaint today.
Yes, but they
later.
were cutting spending every day. He paid off most of the debt from World War I during his administration. He refused he vetoed what later became Social Security twice during his presidency, because he didn't think that was a proper role of government. He thought it was socialism for the government to pay people. And he embarked on what Eisenhower later gets credit for, but the U.S. highway system really began under Coolidge, the federal government investing in building roads. He thought that was a proper function of government. And he cut taxes 3 or 4 times as president. So
can that even happen today? And I'm serious. Even with Republicans who, for the most part, don't seem to be the fiscal conservatives they once were.
Never, no.
Is it possible that you can have fiscally responsible government today?
I don't think so, Dave. Not until there's some sort of systemic collapse of the economy, which I hope doesn't happen. But it would take something cataclysmic like that. I mean, there's going to be a point, and there's no turning back on Social Security now. Obviously, it's too ingrained. We're too dependent on it. I'm too dependent. We're all going to be dependent on it. I do worry that there's going to become a point where it's just not sustainable as it currently exists.
That's 100%.
And
inevitable.
nobody wants to have that conversation in Washington. And I think it's a mistake. You know, you wait until the balloon bursts, you know, before you ought to start taking the air out, you know, before it bursts. And but it doesn't look like we're going to do that.
Yeah. So let's go back again and kind of go along traversing your growth in Missouri politics. So you won election one time or multiple times? Twice. Okay.
Yep, I actually won elections back in the day, which that stopped happening, and I got out of being a candidate. But I got reelected as state rep. I had a very difficult district. It was probably one of the most competitive districts in the state. It was the 2 times I ran. It was the most expensive state rep district in the state. We spent like $65,000.
And where's that?
So I had all of Olivet, a little touch of Creve Coeur. I had Ladue, north of Clayton Road, and I had this unincorporated pocket of kind of blue collar, which was where I lived, north of Creve Coeur, near Maryland Heights. It's an unincorporated little pocket, Schutz Road, Schulte Road in there.
Yeah, sure.
And so it was within a very compact area, very diverse district. It was probably 25% Jewish. It was 25% Catholic. It was 25% Protestant. It was very diverse and diverse opinions. You know, you had very blue collar working people. You had the wealthiest people in St. Louis in that very district. And so it was really kind of a joy to represent, but it was a puzzle to navigate to get. And I won pretty narrowly both times.
So why'd you lose? What happened?
So 1992, we had the Democrats controlled the legislature and had since the 40s. And so we were in the minority, but we had the statewide offices. Governor Ashcroft was term limited, and our Secretary of State, Attorney General, and State Treasurer were all Republicans, and they all decided to run for governor. So now there are 3 vacant statewide offices. I'm 28 years old. And I decided I want to be Secretary of State. And I had a lot of my colleagues were encouraging me. And, you know, at the time, I'm the young, shiny thing, which is hard to believe now. But I ended up running for Secretary of State, won the primary, 4-way primary. I got 50-some% of the vote.
I remember that. I do.
And I was supposed to win in November. The Democrats had nominated not their best candidate, and she had only raised like $16,000 for her entire campaign. She was a county clerk of Pettis County. And it was a foregone conclusion that I was going to win this race. And then right at the end, our gubernatorial candidate that year was Bill Webster, who was on his way to prison. And the Post-Dispatch was doing a number on him for weeks, if not months, before that election day came. You also had Ross Perot on the ballot running for president that year. So George Bush got 38% of the vote in the state. Bill Webster, our governor candidate, got 39% of the vote against Mel Carnahan. And our entire statewide ticket went down. I came the closest, 1%, but the whole ticket went down.
And I think that was true for a lot of states, right? You had the Clinton, sweeping the country. It was a change. And this, this in politics. It's a pendulum. It goes back and forth. So you had the conservative 80s with Reagan, and then H.W. came in.
Right.
And then I think a lot of America, you don't even have to necessarily be liberal or progressive, just saying it's time for a change. And that's just what happened.
There aren't many times throughout our history where one party holds the office for more than 12 years in a chunk. It's happened, but it's rare. And that also, 92 was what they called the year of the woman. Female candidates did exceedingly well that year. And I ran against a female candidate who ended up getting impeached a year and a half later.
I don't recall that. Really?
Yeah. She doctored some paperwork to file her son for state representative. And the Democrats didn't like her. She was a Democrat.
Did they put her up there knowing that she was going to be fodder for you? And they might have not thought from day one she was going to beat you.
They didn't think she was going to win the primary.
Yeah.
She was in a 4-way primary too.
Okay.
And they had a couple of, good candidates. And Judy was a very nice person, really and truly a very nice person, but it's not their best candidate.
Right, right.
And and they really didn't care for her, the Democrats. She was very conservative. But anyway, she ended up getting impeached and removed from office, and the governor appointed another Democrat. So I'm back working, and I did PR for a year for an ad agency here. I had McDonald's restaurants. Ronald McDonald worked for me.
Oh, how about that?
He made more money than I did, but he worked for me.
Of course.
Yeah.
And then you didn't venture too far from politics, because in 1997, here you are.
Oh, no, 96.
96.
Because I decided.
You ran again.
I did.
That's right.
Let's do it again.
Yes.
Because, I really didn't know what I was doing the first time. So in 96, I was thinking it might be a better year, and it really wasn't. But I ran again against the appointed Secretary of State. But I ran a real campaign. I did everything I wanted to do, and but I lost by 3 points that time. So it's going in the wrong direction.
Yeah. So, but there was a primary, I assume, GOP.
No, I didn't have a primary that year.
Oh,
nobody ran against me. I got in.
Really?
I got in early, and so I finished that election. I had no job. I had 2 mortgages now because I had no job. I had a 2-year-old son and an 8-month pregnant wife, and my car lease was up. And we had one
There's
car.
a country song in there somewhere.
Yeah, right. And so I'm thinking this politics isn't working out so well. And so I was going to take a job selling phone systems. A guy I'd met during the campaign, he offered me a job to sell phone equipment. I said, I can do that. You got to pay the bills. And the chairman of the Republican Party, I shared my thoughts with him about how we were getting outmaneuvered technologically by the Democrats. They were targeting much better than we were. And this is the early years of targeting. And he said, how would you like to come run the place? And I said, well, can I get a car? He said, yeah, we'll get you a car. I said, I'm in.
Yeah, right.
And so I transitioned from being a candidate to being an operative overnight like that, and never looked back.
And the title was executive director
right.
of the Missouri State
Republican Party.
And you did that, what, 5-6 years?
7 years.
7 years.
Yeah, almost.
All right. And then you got out and started, you got into
consulting. So what happened was,
in politics. Yeah.
We had, not because of me, but the party had a phenomenal run between 97 and 2002, where we took over the state Senate, we took over the state House, we won the Senate seat that John Ashcroft had lost. Jim Talent won that seat in 2002. And we were just having a tremendous run. And the chairman of the party was a very good friend of mine at that point, Ann Wagner. Mm-hmm. And so the chairman doesn't get paid, the executive director does, and the executive director manages a staff of political operatives that gets increasingly bigger in presidential year, because we were up to that point still a battleground state. Yeah. So we had a lot of money coming in, and it was an exciting time to be there. And Ann told me, she said, you're doing a good job. You're one nutty chairman away from being unemployed. What you need to do, she said, is you need to start your own business. And I will pay you to run the party for another year, as a consultant. But you go out and get clients. And so that's what I did.
Great advice.
It was great advice. Great advice.
Yeah. And you did that until when? You were pulled back into a role within the GOP,
So
right?
I ran my business. It grew pretty nicely. And in 2013, so that was 10 years. In 2013, I sold that business to a client of ours in Ohio. They were our biggest client at the time, and they were acquiring shops, little shops like mine, and trying to really become this mammoth political firm. And so I went to work for them, and I was commuting to Columbus every week. That got old. And in 2014 late, the state party, and I had been the fundraiser, even after I left as executive director, I still raised the money all those years until 2012 for the party. And when I stepped aside in 2013 to go do this other thing, the party had kind of fallen into disarray, and they weren't raising money, and they didn't have a particularly effective cycle in 2014. And a lot of people asked me if I would consider coming to save the place. And so much of my professional life was invested in that Missouri Republican Party. So I extricated myself from Columbus, came back here, and I ran for chairman of the party. There were several people in the race and got elected, and there you have it.
Yep. You made all the right friends. During this time, your name is known in Missouri politics, and even just general citizens kind of know, first of all, the famous name itself, as we joked about John Hancock. But John, then what I would say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, kind of a dark period, frankly, for your career and for you personally as well.
Yeah.
And just to set it up for people who may have forgotten about it or may not be familiar with it, and then I'm going to let John address it. But there was a state auditor at the time, Tom Schweik, who announced that he's running for governor in 2016.
Yep.
He announced it, I guess, in early 15 or something. But it wasn't long after that tragedy hit him and his family. He committed suicide. And I remember the headline going, whoa, what's going on there? And it didn't take long. I mean, very quickly, I start hearing these rumors that, well, there's this smear campaign against him. And who knows what else was going on in his life. We're not going to speculate about that.
No.
It's still a horrible thing for his family. I'm sure they still deal with it.
Yep.
But it was talked about as this was kind of the final thing for him. And he had committed suicide based on some rumblings that people were making about his religious affiliation, that even though he was Episcopalian, apparently the rumor was, well, he's really Jewish. As if that should really matter.
Exactly.
But I'm just repeating kind of what was going on at the time. John, for you, though, the finger started to come back at you going, not only are there rumors about that, but John Hancock is the one who apparently, allegedly, has been spreading them. And then you had to answer to that.
I did.
So I want you to take the mic from here and explain when you first got word that your name was being drawn into this and how you responded to it.
So, yeah, man, this was clearly the worst period of my life. And so when I announced that I was running for chairman, Tom, it's such a long story. In 2012, there was a Senate race, and John Bruner was a client of mine. And there was and then John was looking at running for, I can't even remember, I think it was the Senate maybe in 14, if there was a Senate race that year, I can't. But he was looking at running for something, and Tom announced that he was considering running for it. Well, one of the things our business does is opposition research. So John Bruner was a client, and we did a research book on Tom Schweik. And so he found out, he saw that we'd been paid to do research, and we had a very, very rough phone call in 2013 over that event. And he said, did you do the research? I said, I did, Tom. He said, well, what's in there? And I said, well, I can't, it's my client. I said, there's nothing in there that's horrible. He was not happy. And so up until that point, we had a fine relationship, I mean, I didn't know him well, but, we had a pleasant relationship. And so when I announced that I was going to run for chairman, he said he was going to, don't do this. I'm going to destroy you, basically. And I had been under the mistaken impression that he was Jewish. I didn't know. And so he believed that I was running around telling everybody that he's Jewish, don't vote for him, which wasn't happening. I'm sure I may have mentioned it to somebody in passing, like, well, she's Catholic and he's Jewish, and so I get a call one day from John Danforth telling me that Tom's upset about this. And I said,
we're talking the patriarch of GOP politics in Missouri.
And I said, well, John, I thought he was, I'm sorry. And he said, I think you should call Tom. And so I did. I called Tom. We had a conversation. I said, Tom, I'll never say that again. But I would never have said it maliciously. I mean, it's just not a thing. Heck, we elected a Jewish governor in 2016. And so, long story short, I'm running for chairman. He's texting me, I'm going to destroy you on Fox News and CNN. I mean, it's nasty. And I win. And 5 days later, Tom killed himself. And and left a message on Tony Messenger's voicemail that it was because of me.
And Tony Messenger is a big wheel at the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, columnist, editorial writer, some influence.
So anyway, that came out. You know, I'm a little bit, I don't know what to say. I mean, the guy has killed himself. I mean, and it was...
There's nothing that you can say that's going to look good no matter what, right?
Right. So a few days later is the funeral, and John Danforth presides over the funeral and basically calls me out by name, saying that words do hurt, they kill people, and blah, blah, blah.
He says that at the funeral.
At the funeral. He was doing the service, which happened to be on my birthday. And at that point is when everything started, we decided that I wasn't going to say anything in the short term. I got suspended from KMOX. The television show said, let's take a hiatus. I did it, and several of my clients left. My research director, who had been with me 12 years, I had a couple of, by becoming chairman of the Republican Party, which is a volunteer job, I couldn't work on primary races in the state of Missouri. So I've cut my business, by a lot. My research director leaves and so I don't have much now at all. And it looks like everything's coming down on me. I later found out that Senator Danforth ran a campaign through Fleshman Hillard to take me out. And I saw the campaign roll out. There was a whole series of things that happened. I waited, I think, almost 2 weeks, and then I came out and gave my statement. Here's what the real situation. I told the whole story in much longer form than this.
Yeah, I remember reading it.
And I trusted that there would, at some point, be a police report on the suicide that would come out. And it didn't come out until late April. And it said there's no evidence of a whisper campaign. He had attempted suicide before. It was as exonerative as anything could have been. And slowly but surely, I got my life back together. But I had 2 kids in college at the time, and it was it was a rough time.
So did KMOX, and Fox 2 News, did they kind of do their own look into it, investigation? They came back and said, there's just nothing here. Welcome back.
Well, I think once the police report came out,
okay, and
I can't remember the exact timing of how much longer until things kind of started up again, but it was fairly shortly after that.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
And so we're many years away from it now, and I'm glad it's passed, but it was a tough time.
Yeah, so like you just kind of hit when I was going to ask, 8 years later, does it ever come back up at all in
Rarely.
Discussions?
Okay. Rarely, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you kind of had to rebuild your reputation,
right?
Rebuild your business.
Yep.
But obviously it worked because you're back doing very well. So today you are doing what?
So we have a consulting firm called Hancock and Kelley. My partner is in Jefferson City, and I hired him out of college in 2005, and so he's been with me ever since. And great guy, and he's younger, which is good. And so I'm increasingly turning things over more and more there. Mm-hmm. But we do work on the research side all over the country, and then we do a fair amount of political work in Missouri and a few other places.
Yeah, so we're going to, this is kind of the fun part of it, because now we're going to bring it to today and really look at the state of politics, not just statewide and in the Midwest, but nationally, because, man, these are some interesting times, aren't they?
Well, that's one way to put it.
So the first questions will center on nationally kind of GOP. One of the things I'm talking to Michael Kelley about is I think the Democrats, by their own admission, have a little bit of a Joe Biden problem because of some things that related to his age. You know, that's that podcast. For you, the GOP has what we might call the Trump problem. Now, I know Trump supporters don't want to phrase it that way, but behind the scenes, that's being looked at.
Yeah.
This guy is still seen, as of today, as the head of the party, even though he has been indicted. We don't know where that's going to go, but he still has a ton of support. So for both you personally and even professionally, where do you come down on the immediate future of the GOP with Donald Trump still seen as the leader of the party, but a very flawed one at that, in terms of what is up for the election in 2000, the primary and then the election.
Yeah. So, my relationship with Donald Trump, he was a candidate for president while I was chairman of the state party. So I actually nominated him on the floor of the national convention.
Really?
No, I reported the Missouri. I didn't nominate him. I reported Missouri's vote.
Oh, got it. I understand.
And, I voted for him. And he wasn't my first choice. I think there were 17 candidates running. I think he was my 17th choice. But he was the nominee, and I'm a Republican, and I supported him, voted for him. And I really hoped that, nobody expected him to win in 2016.
Right.
After the Access Hollywood tape came out, nobody expected him. And he wouldn't have won but for Hillary Clinton,
flawed candidate. Right.
So I hoped and believed that once the office of the presidency and that weight descended upon him, that he would be presidential. And, I'm not in 100% concert with his policy views, but I like a lot of them. The move to deregulate, I thought, was quite good. I was in favor of the tax cuts. I'm not a protectionist. I didn't like the tariffs. I thought that was bad policy. I didn't like his approach to NATO, which I think over the course of a long term would do great destabilization to the world. So I'm not, it's not that I don't like the guy, but like the policies. I like many of the policies, but not all of them. And Donald Trump is a polarizing figure. And the problem with polarizing figures is that there's as many voters that love you hate you. And in his case, the balance of that is shifted more towards the dislike. If you just look at any national poll, he's got his unfavorable rating, and his very unfavorable rating is extremely high. So I don't think he can win a national election. But the Republican voters, that's where they are. Donald Trump is a nationalist. He's a populist. He's not a conservative, as I understand the term conservative. And I thought that there were more conservatives in our grassroots base than there actually were. There were a lot of these kind of populist folks out there. And a lot of folks, there's always been a strain of anti-establishment sentiment in the GOP. You can go back and look, the Ross Perot phenomenon took a lot of those kinds of voters out of our bloc. Pat Buchanan, Ron Paul, all of those candidates, insurgent candidates, took a fairly substantial chunk of the primary vote and the caucus vote for us. And Trump got that and then some. Plus, I do believe he brought new voters in to the GOP, a lot of blue collar workers, folks like my dad, who had passed by then, but like him, I think, who may have not considered themselves Republicans, were really enamored of Donald Trump. And so he changed kind of the formation of the GOP.
So you voted for him in the past. Would you, I don't like labels, but I'll throw one out at you. Would you be considered a never Trumper today?
I don't think I can vote for him. Yeah.
So 2024, let's just play pretend here, and he's the GOP nominee in the general election. Are you voting for a Democrat, or are you just not voting at all then?
I couldn't vote for Biden. I suspect, I mean, who knows if it's even going to be Biden. And if it is Biden-Harris, you're really voting for Biden and Harris, because the odds are that at some point in that next 4 years, Kamala Harris is going to be the president. Yeah. That's just, that's just the way the life cycle works.
So of the candidates you've seen so far, whether they've announced officially, like a Nikki Haley and others,
right,
or those that may announce, who do you like?
Well, I could vote for any of them, but for Donald Trump. Of the ones that, Ron DeSantis has some appeal to me. I don't know that he's been tested enough. And he has got some of the same kind of populist instincts that Donald Trump has, as opposed to true conservative. I mean, I'm somebody that believes the government ought to take its hands off the private sector as much as possible. And that's not exactly the way Ron DeSantis has governed in Florida. If you look at the Disney situation and some other things. I like Nikki Haley some. I like Tim Scott from South Carolina. I really like Governor Hutchinson of Arkansas a lot. But, we'll see what happens. I don't think Mike Pence has a constituency to win. But I could live with any of them.
You obviously are in an industry where you're going to take a lot of arrows, obviously from the other party, but increasingly now within your own party, because people really are divided on the Trump issue within the GOP.
They are.
You're a never Trumper, you're a rhino,
right?
What have you.
I've been called it all.
Yes. So a traitor, what have you.
Yeah.
Have you sort of given up on a certain section of the GOP, or do you still see I can reach out to them? Because I just know, and I'm not taking sides here, I'm just being the mediator, folks. but in terms of me being the political junkie and talking to a lot of folks, there's going to be a certain segment, and Donald Trump even said it himself, right? He could walk down Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and he would still have his big support.
Right.
That's exactly right. So there's a segment of the GOP I don't think you're getting back anytime soon.
Yeah, and honestly, if Donald Trump somehow is not the nominee, would anyone be surprised if he tried to run a third-party effort, which would guarantee a Democrat wins the White House? I think that's a rift that's a real problem. The Democrats have one, too, with their progressive wing, really that has moved beyond the traditional kind of labor Democrat that you associate with, So they've got their own little division problems. There are really 4 parties in the country right now. And so I think we're probably on the front end, Dave, of a realignment of voters. And the real question, I think, is, will there ever be really a conservative party in this country again? That's the real question. Are there enough folks out there that believe in limited government, low taxes, pro-growth policies to win a national election? I hope so, because that's who I am, but I'm not sure.
You mentioned earlier that some of your views have, you didn't use the word soften, but, they're malleable. We all go through that. We look back 30, 40 years ago. I was really adamantly opposed to this, and now I'm 60. I'm like, I can kind of see that. So whether it's gun control, whether it's pro-life versus pro-choice, any of that, what's one issue that the strict Republican would say, this is where I stand, but John Hancock comes along and says, well, I've kind of softened my view on that a little bit. Can you give us an example? Yeah,
well, I haven't softened my view, but, I had to take a position on abortion, and I'm pro-life. I believe abortion is murder. And I ran in a district that didn't necessarily share that point of view. And it was an issue both times I ran for state representative. And my position always was, I believe in pro-life, but I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and obviously when necessary, when the mother's life and the child's life are in conflict. And that's really always been my position. The GOP has navigated over that since that time into this no exceptions for any reason, no abortion. Well, that's not where the American people are. And we just lost a Supreme Court race in Wisconsin over that very thing.
Right.
So I think the party at some point is going to have to comport itself on that issue where most people don't believe that abortion should be allowed for any reason whatsoever at any point in pregnancy either. Those two extreme positions are very minority views. And there's a line somewhere in the middle where a plurality of Americans believe should be drawn to protect that, where the child's life interest outweighs the mother's liberty interest, which is why this issue is controversial, because those are two very high values in this society of ours, life and liberty, and they really conflict here on the issue of abortion. So that's an area where I think Republicans are not going to have much success if we hold to this no exceptions for anything on abortion. That's going to cost us elections. Yeah. On the issue of guns, I'm very much pro-gun. I think it is a mistake, though, that to conceal carry, you don't have to be licensed and trained.
Like in Florida.
Right.
Just passed.
Right. Or Missouri, you don't have to be licensed or trained.
Right.
And I understand the rationale for that, but we have a crime problem in this country. And the crime problem in our inner cities in this country, and it's not limited just to the inner cities anymore either. And the police hands are tied because if somebody's carrying a gun around, if you had to be licensed and trained and you're carrying a gun around, that would be illegal. Now, if I'm a would-be armed robber and I'm carrying a gun around but not using it yet for the commission of a crime, and I'm stopped by the police and I've got this gun in my car, there's nothing they can do about it. I think that's a mistake. So I think there are, you hear people talk about reasonable restrictions. I actually think there are reasonable restrictions, not extreme ones, not slippery slope ones that result in taking people's guns away from them. I think that would be a mistake. I don't favor a registry of guns by the government, because the whole point of the Second Amendment is to protect us from the government. But things like licensure for a concealed permit would, I think, help in the fight against crime.
Red flag laws, what do you think of those?
Yeah, they're tricky.
Yeah.
Because, they would have to be, there are red flag laws I could support. I think all of us agree that there are some folks out there who should not have access to weapons, in whether they're going to harm themselves or somebody else.
There are the extremes on all these issues that you're talking about. They get the most attention.
They do.
So when we're talking just about gun control here, so you do have one side over here, there shouldn't be any restrictions. Right. Every state, I don't want anyone to know my business. Right. And if I want to go buy whatever kind of weaponry, I have the right to do that.
Yep.
To the other side, we need to just confiscate all guns.
Yeah.
Even your handgun.
Get rid of them.
The FBI is going to come into your house.
Right.
Okay. Two very extreme.
Here's the problem. I can take the positions I'm taking as a talk show host, even as a political operative. And I'm very comfortable with the positions I've taken, and I believe in them. If I were a candidate today, and this is the problem, the people who participate in primaries have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller over each successive year. And so you are getting selected to be the party nominee by a infinitesimal portion of the population.
That's a great point.
And if you're in a 4 or 5 way primary, 6% of the registered voters can select the candidate for that major political party. 6% of all the registered voters, not of the Republican voters. You got to win 30.
And that's where the extremism can come in.
And that's where it is. And so if I'm running for office, and all of our districts are, and even most of our states now, are not all that competitive in terms of bipartisan elections. So you win your office, 70+ % of elected officials in this country win their office in primary elections. They may have an opponent from the other side, but they don't really have a chance to win. So now you've got, in a good year, 35-40% of the people show up in the big primaries, for U.S. Senate and Congress. And of that 35 or 40%, they're split. Some vote in the Democrat, some vote in the Republican. So now you're looking at 18-20% of the voters are selecting the one candidate that all of us get to choose between from each party come November. That system has produced candidates who are going to appeal to that base. It's just the way markets work. I mean, you've got a customer base out there, you appeal to them. A guy like me running for office with the same views I had in 1992 when I was a Republican nominee, my views really haven't changed. I couldn't win a primary today.
The analogy that I've used is like a football field. So let's say, take someone like you. So you've got the 50-yard line. People sitting there say, well, I'm a little bit Democrat, I'm a little bit Republican. You go a little bit to the right, like the 35-yard line. Yeah. Okay, I'm kind of a moderate Republican.
Right of center.
Yes, the extremes are out in the end zone, way out
on the
here.
1-yard line.
Okay, exactly. So then you have the left, and it's the same thing. Yeah. What happens is you really haven't changed your seat. Let's say you're still sitting at the 35-yard line over on the right side. But
I'm probably at the 20-yard line.
But that's the thing.
Right.
The field has moved on you.
Right.
So when people look at you and say, John, you're not even a true conservative. Yeah. You're not a true Republican. He's like, guys, I haven't changed my views in 30 years.
Right.
You've moved the field on me. You've moved.
Well,
I've not.
And we're throwing around words like conservative that don't mean what they used to, right?
Right.
Here's the analogy I use. Politics is a game of tug of war. So you got the rope there, you got the little lake here running through, and you got the flag in the middle of the rope. And the flag and the lake is where historically we have governed in this country. And sometimes the flag moves a little this way, sometimes the flag moves a little that way, but you never really see the flag, zipping that far one way or the other. The most important people for moving that flag are the fat people who are at the end of the rope. You put all your weight at the end of the rope, the fat people. And what our politics has become now is that it is so critical for us to feed the fat people at the end of the rope. And then what happens inevitably is that when you do win elections, you're still governing more or less around that river, that lake in the middle. And the fat people get very dissatisfied. We were talking about Lori Lightfoot, a progressive mayor of Chicago, and she was a progressive. They loved her down here at the end of the rope, until she started governing, and then they kicked her out. And the same thing tends to happen on our side as well.
So you actually segued perfectly into my next question about big cities, whether it's St. Louis, Chicago, San Francisco, New York. And this is one of the things I'm talking to Michael Kelley about too, in that a lot of people on the right will say, who runs the big cities? It's the Democrats. Look at the problems that they're having, whether it's crime, whether it's homelessness in the street. Is that a fair argument, or is it much more nuanced and complicated, or is it really an indictment of progressive policies?
Well, so what happens in a political context, if you're in a place like the city of St. Louis, you've got one party, but there's really two factions. You go down to Jasper County, Missouri, it's all Republicans, but there are two factions of them down there. American politics has a way of bifurcating itself. And the struggle that's going on in St. Louis now is that we had been governed for multiple decades by the more moderate Democrat element. I mean, they're still quite liberal, like Michael Kelley. But now the progressives have taken over, and we're gonna go through this experiment now that they've seen in Seattle and Portland and some of these cities. We're in the middle of it. We're gonna defund the police. We're gonna do all of those things. It's not gonna work, I don't think. And is that a partisan political problem? There's a lot more going on. The social ills that beset folks that live in urban cores is profound. There are sociological reasons where you've got multiple homes with no fathers in them. That's not good for folks. There is a genuine gang problem that exists in many cities throughout this country, and it's organized. It's no less significant than the mob was in the 30s. And they have relationships with cartels in Mexico. They have a leadership structure, largely based out of Atlanta, ironically. Couple of guys that were in the prison there. I'd learned all this from a police officer. Fascinating. But they're networked. So if they need guns in San Francisco, we got them. Boom. They're on their way. And I mean, it's quite extensive. So all of these things are happening in our cities. And these gangs are using kids to go out and commit the crimes because they're juveniles. And then they're electing prosecutors who won't put them in jail anyway. So, I mean, there's a systematic effort there going on that's eroding much of our cities. And it's a concern to me.
It's amazing, though, that some of these progressive DAs are being recalled. And it's even talked about here in St. Louis. There's an issue, obviously, with our local, but whether it's San Francisco or Portland, wherever, is this a sign that even people on the left say, you know what, it sounded great in theory, but it doesn't work in practicality, because now I don't even want to take my kids downtown, whether it's San Francisco, and see people defecating in the streets and all this stuff.
You've got to have enough interested citizens in those jurisdictions to do that. We just had a primary in St. Louis the other day for the Board of Aldermen, and what was the turnout? 13%?
Yeah, that's right.
13%.
It gets back to what you were saying.
Yeah.
People aren't showing up.
And so, do I think the policies of Kim Gardner are popular with folks? No. I helped run a Proposition P campaign in the city back in 2017. This was a sales tax increase to fund the police in the city of St. Louis, to increase their numbers and give them a raise. Passed with 58% of the vote. Had its strongest numbers in North St. Louis City. Makes sense. It's where the crime's the highest. It had its worst numbers in the Central West End, where the progressives tend to congregate. But it passed with a healthy 50% of the vote there. So I don't think there's a stomach to defund the police among the citizens of St. Louis, but they're not voting that way.
Right. I'm an optimist by nature.
Me too.
But I admit that it becomes very heavy at times to see our country, especially politically. And I point the finger so much at social media and Twitter in particular.
Yep.
And I know there's a St. Louis connection to it. I think it's a cesspool. And I think there is so much misinformation to outright lying that people just believe. You may have been a target of it at times. I don't.
I was on Rachel Maddow.
Oh, is that right?
Back when I was going through all that stuff. Cher tweeted at me.
Cher.
What a horrible human being I am. Cher.
And would Cher have done that, 40 years ago? No, it's just because we didn't have that. But now we've normalized that kind of hatred toward each other.
Yep.
John, I don't see an end to that. I don't see a solution to it. I don't mean to sound like the older people when I was young going, man, I never want to have that attitude. But here I am at
loud
age
music.
60. Yes, get off my lawn.
Yeah.
But I do, and this is strictly, there are a lot of things behind this, but I'm just focusing right now strictly on social media and Twitter. And I don't know what you do about it. I'm a First Amendment guy.
Me too.
Is there any kind of a solution, or do we need to learn to just live with it?
I think we have to learn to live with it. It's here because, and it's so destructive. Facebook, how many marriages has Facebook broken up?
Oh, yeah.
Just think about it on that level, let alone all the vitriol in the political space. But it's been very destabilizing. And people that have had these kind of extreme viewpoints have always been with us. Mm-hmm. You'd go to a Republican club meeting, there'd be somebody out there that's, in the John Birch Society or whatever. Right. But now they've all found each other in social media, and there's a lot more of them than we thought. And I think their numbers are growing because of the impact of social media. It's a concern, but we're going to have to learn to live with it. And I do believe, Dave, that most people are not extremists. Most people, live their lives. The nice thing about America historically has been that we don't have to wake up every day worrying about the government. Yeah, right. That may be changing now. But I think most people want to have a better life for their kids. They want to live in safe communities. This is the vast majority of people. And the vast majority of people are going to have to figure out how they're going to exist in this age of social media, how they're going to get accurate information. And now it's work. Mm-hmm. It used to not be that much work to get accurate information. It's work now. And you got to verify everything you see. I'll tell you a quick story. Mm-hmm. This ChatGPT. Yeah. So we do opposition research. So my partner got on, and I won't tell you who we were researching, but what is so-and-so's position on immigration? And it spits out 3 paragraphs, none of which was accurate.
Really?
Yeah. And it's got citations. It said this on CNN on such and such a date on Politics Today with Dana Bash. Click on the link. There's no link. Go find the show that was on that day. Look on the CNN actual website, and the person they said what they said wasn't even on the show that day.
Now, that's where I'm a First Amendment guy, but that kind of stuff, you got to prosecute that, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's got to stop.
Right. And so now, so that's the today issue with AI. They're going to figure that out. Yeah. And pretty soon, you're going to be able to ask a question. And the other thing, we gave it a couple of parameters, write a 60-second campaign ad about so-and-so. And it was a pretty darn good ad, and it had the camera angles. It had, within 8 seconds. Mm-hmm. That's scary to me.
Yeah, and that even I wasn't even prepared to ask this question, but we're talking about alleged misinformation and all this with Fox News and January 6th, and we all know that the trial is going to be starting. Any opinion on where this may come out?
The Trump stuff?
Yeah.
So I think
Fox News in particular about being sued for $1.6 million, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting case because there is a First Amendment right, So the question, I guess, becomes, did they knowingly and maliciously, because that's the standard for libel or slander, and, that's going to be what they're going to have to argue, that they were just putting this viewpoint on from this person that was alleging blah, blah, blah. Is that illegal? Maybe not. I don't know. Yep. So, I am less concerned about the Fox Newses of the world. I wish that folks would get news from a variety of sources. It's helpful.
Amen.
There's nothing wrong with watching Fox News. I wouldn't watch it exclusively. And ditto with any of these other things. And I wouldn't read one newspaper exclusively. And then we have to think for ourselves at some point. But they do also, then there are these deep fakes that are out there where they can literally put words in your mouth and have you saying them on a camera, words you've never said in your life, and they put that out and people believe you said that.
I have stopped doing this because I was just getting tired of it, but I would have friends, Facebook friends, just post a link to something. Can you believe this? And it was so obvious. I didn't even have to do any other research to know it's just not true.
Right.
It's fake.
Yeah.
But I'd go ahead, I'd find something, I would post a link, and I'd say, hey, Bob,
that's not true.
You're a good friend of mine, but it's not true.
Yeah.
And the response I would get would be like, yeah, I didn't think so. It sounded weird. And I'm thinking, why then did you
disseminate it? Right.
And I was constantly doing that until I said, you know what? I'm just not even going to focus on this anymore.
There's so much of that out there.
It is.
And it's people it's friends. It's that's why I say there's work to be done by each of us to make sure that we're getting accurate information, and more importantly, those of us that do what you and I do, that we're disseminating information that's accurate. That is very important to me.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of, can we still have genuine conversations with people we disagree with? Here in our region of the country, you do just that with your partner in crime, Michael Kelley.
Yeah.
As I said at the beginning, joined at the hip. How did that come about?
So it's a great story. Gene Carnahan was running for election to the Senate in 2002. I was the executive director of the Missouri Republican Party. Michael was the young punk executive director of the Missouri Democratic Party. I'm having a news conference because they're attacking poor Jim Talent for taking too much pharmaceutical money. So I got all of Gene Carnahan's campaign records. I'm having a news conference, invite the press over to the office to tell the truth about the pharmaceutical donations. And who shows up at my press conference? Michael Kelley, handing out paper, slamming Jim Talent. I'm thinking, that's rude. So I did it to him a couple of weeks later.
Oh, man, tit for tat. Here we go.
So then we had a debate before the Chamber of Commerce about the elections, the two executive directors. And so after the debate, we talked a little bit. And our backgrounds are kind of similar. His dad was a blue-collar labor guy. My dad was a blue-collar, non-organized labor guy, but very similar background. And he was kind of nice. I liked him. And so anyway, 2003, the next year, I start my own business. I get an account that they want to have a bipartisan team representing them. It's not a campaign. It's a corporate client. And they said, do you work with any Democrats? And I said, well, yes, I do. And so I found Michael's phone number and I called him. I said, hey, would you be interested in working on this account with me? And he said, sure. And so we worked on that together, and then actually ran a cigarette tax campaign. And he was one of the first people I brought in there to help with that, with labor, because he knows he's got great organized labor connections that I don't. And so in 2008, they'd asked me to be a guest on the Reardon Roundtable.
On KMOX.
On KMOX, and their Democrat had dropped out because Mark has a Democrat and a Republican on all the time. So they said, do you know any Democrats? I said, yeah. So we did the Reardon Roundtable. And then, we weren't particularly close at that point, but we got along, and he's easy to get along with. I'm pretty easy to get along with. And so they had us back, and they just thought that it was kind of the repartee they liked. Yeah. And so they then had us on every Tuesday during the '08 election to talk about the McCain-Obama race, and we would, go at it. And then they started saying, would you guys be interested in filling in when one of the hosts is away? And, sure. I grew up listening to KMOX, So, and then just as the years rolled, you go through life's crap, and I went through, well, we talked about one of the episodes, but a couple of really rough patches, and he did too. And we were just there for each other. And he is, I love the man. I mean, he's got a heart of gold. He's one of the most generous, giving people I've ever known in my life. And, he's generally wrong on politics, but
of course,
but so what? Life is too short. And, if I'm in a bind, if I'm in a pinch, well, I'll tell you this story. So my wife went to go see My Big Fat Greek Wedding 2 with her friend.
Uh-huh.
And my daughter was at work. And so I had the house to myself on a Saturday night.
Uh-oh.
Does it get any better than that? And so I run down to my favorite spot there, Massa's, right there.
Yep.
And order up the usual, the Pepe medallions, a little fettuccine on the side, and some broccoli. I'm having a glass of wine there. And I'm going to take it home because I don't want to leave the dog alone. And I'm feeling kind of weird. And they bring the bill over, and I can't move my left arm. I'm thinking, this is odd.
Uh-oh.
So I lift it up, and I put it, and I sign the thing, And it's like when sometimes you sleep on it wrong, your arm goes to sleep. That's what I kind of thought it was. So, and they had the high bar stools there. So I hop down off of the bar stool, and as soon as I put weight on my left side, boom, down I go. I've had a stroke.
Wow.
And the whole left side is gone. And so I'm laying there, and the guy says, you want me to call an ambulance? I said, yeah, it's a good idea. And so I go to call my wife, who, of course, can't answer the phone. She's in the movies. Yeah. So my next phone call was Michael Kelley. It was the day Francis Slay said, I'm not running for re-election.
Oh, crazy.
And so anyway, I get to the hospital. He's calling Georgianne until she finally, answers the phone and says, he's going to Missouri Baptist. And so I think Georgianne got there first, and Michael was right behind her. And he says, I'm here to see my partner.
Yeah, right. Of course. Yes.
Oh, go right in,
yes,
sir.
Yeah, exactly.
Fortunately, I got the TPA shot. I can still play the piano.
Yeah.
Very, very blessed.
Has there ever been a time where you guys genuinely got at it, on whether it was on Fox 2, KMOX,
early
where
on,
you had to apologize almost later?
Yeah, early on.
Yeah.
There was some heated, honestly, politics has become so personalized now. There's not a whole lot of policy debates anymore. Yeah. But we get a little testy over guns because that's a very big passion of his. I've come a fair amount on organized labor, but in the early days, and that's like core to Michael's persona. And, in the early days, I would take some shots at organized labor that in retrospect, I wish I hadn't done. And I've learned a lot, from him as it relates to those guys,
John, where do we get to the point again, as I lament the state of our country, but when I hear this story about how you and Michael truly are genuinely good friends, if not best friends, you couldn't be more diverse in your political opinions. We are told by so many people.
Well, we're both on the 35-yard line.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
And the field's been moved on both of you.
Right.
But we're almost told that you got to stand up for your constitutional rights. Now, both sides say that.
Right.
The right is destroying the Constitution. No, you on the left, you're destroying the Constitution. And you can't be friends with those people. It's almost like they live in another country that we're at war with.
Yep.
But you two are an example how, and frankly, you said this too. I think that you are more indicative of the average American.
I think that's right.
We don't fight with each other, but you wouldn't know that when you're on social media or you're watching television.
Or at Thanksgiving dinner sometimes.
Or, Uncle Joe's over here, a QAnon guy, right?
Right.
Who's espousing his stuff.
Yeah.
But, part of me says, tell us how you guys are able to do that. But the other part says, no, I don't think you need to give us that advice because I think most people are like
they are.
That,
I agree with that. And And our politics can work when we have to solve problems. And, if we manufacture all of these apocalyptic scenarios that the other side's creating, when in reality, we ought to be talking about, okay, can we sustain this level of government spending indefinitely? You're either going to have to raise a lot of taxes on people, or you're going to have to cut a lot of money out of the federal budget, or you're going to have to do a little of both, which is what we did in 1993 and 94. Guess what? We had a balanced budget then. And if your focus is on solving problems, and you kind of come and you give a compromise, I guess is a dirty word, but that's how things get done. That's a whole nother subject. We put so many reforms in place. We've reformed ourselves. With all of the campaign finance reforms and the lobbying restrictions and the getting rid of the seniority system in Congress, getting rid of earmarks. Those are all things that made the body politic work. It was like an immune system that was built in, and we've stripped it all out. Party bosses no longer matter. And a lot of people, it sounds good on its face, but those were the very institutions that made our institutions work together, and it's all gone now.
Let's address the money thing, because now we're getting into my field, and I'm always intrigued by this, that it's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? Because free country, if I want to give what I want to any candidate, why should there be a cap? Or this corporation, others say, you know what? Every candidate should get X amount of dollars, keep it even.
Public financing from the government.
Where do you land on that?
Freedom. And what we've done here is we've created this system now where, take the Donald Trump case. He's being prosecuted for a campaign. At the end of the day, it's a campaign finance violation that he used money to pay off a porn star to benefit his campaign, and it was illegal. All right, why? And now you've got your candidates are limited to how much money they can take. It's got to be personal contribution at X thousands, a couple grand that you can give to a politician running for office. And that people say, okay, let's limit that because nobody should be able to buy a politician. All right. Well, what ends up happening is that we've spawned these PACs now, these super PACs that support the campaigns that end up spending a multiple number of millions of dollars more than the candidate committee does. And they raise money. It's unfettered. It's unlimited. It's whatever. They raise the money. They spend the money to get their candidate elected. The only restriction there is that the campaign and the PAC cannot coordinate on message. That makes no sense. I prefer a system where you write the check, and if the voter doesn't like the fact that so-and-so has given $1 million to this candidate, then vote against them.
Right.
But, the campaign, the candidate ought to have the ability to control his or her own message to the voters. And that system doesn't exist right now at the state or the federal level. And that's wrong, I think. And so, I'm not in favor of the government handing out money to politicians to go run for office. Let the market decide. There's a lot of people that run for office that can't raise any money. Well, that's the market speaking.
Right. By your own admission, you are not a Trump guy. But I do want to get your opinion on what is happening and
Sure.
him being indicted. And people think that Alvin Bragg is kind of overstepped. And they say there are so many things surrounding Donald Trump, whether it's did he incite January 6th?
Right.
How about his actual real estate business dealings in New York,
Right.
where even his own attorney had to plea bargain? There were more serious charges. And this is what we get.
Yeah.
What's your feeling about
I think this is very regrettable. I think it's a terrible precedent. I think it's a weak case. Why, if they were going to go after, if they felt like the need to go at Donald Trump, it's already on the record that he was valuing his assets for tax purposes and overvaluing for borrowing money purposes. There's a case there. It's complicated. I get it. But I mean, that's actually breaking the law. This thing is not breaking the law, I don't think. And I mean, it should be dismissed on summary judgment. I don't know that it will be. And it's also, I've got two real concerns about this case. One being that it may minimize people's reaction to what I think are much more substantial cases that are out there, particularly the documents case, because I think that's cut and dried obstruction of justice case. So it'll do that. The other thing is there are thousands, well, hundreds, if not thousands, of partisan elected prosecuting attorneys in every county of this country. And if you get a system where local prosecutors feel like they can just go at the president of the United States and indict him, I mean, you're opening up a can of worms there.
Yeah, you're worried about the slippery slope.
I am worried very much about it, and it could, whether it's on the left or on the right. And there's plenty of prosecutors that get elected who are, out there. So it does concern me on that level. I don't think it's a very good case.
Yeah. Well, let's wrap this up with two things. Number one, where's John Hancock going to be in 5 years, 10 years?
Dead.
No.
Well, my retirement.
Still working? I mean.
My retirement party is going to be at Pope Chapel. And no.
I like that line. I'll use that. Yeah.
I kind of, my dream for retirement, I'd like to eventually turn the business over to JP if he wants to do it. And, politics is changing. There may not, you don't really retire from being a political consultant. You just stop getting hired.
Yeah, right.
But my dream retirement gig is playing the piano at Disney World. They're outside of Casey's Ice Cream Parlor.
Do you sing?
I don't sing. I play ragtime, and I played ragtime piano all through high school and college at Six Flags. It paid for my college education.
I probably saw you at some point. When were you there?
I was there from 80 to 87.
Okay. I probably saw
every
you
summer. Well,
tickling
in the
keys.
early years, I was just there in the fall. They turned the Dodge cars, they turned it into a beer garden. And I played out there. And then they moved me to Cicero's Pizza and Calico's Chicken. And in the last 4 years, I was at the St. Louis train station, stomping on a big wood stage and playing the piano.
I'm going to be at some retirement place in Florida when I'm 85 and walk in and John, there you are, just playing away.
I compose. I really enjoy composing. I wrote the music that my daughter and I walked down the aisle to.
Oh my God!
And that was pretty cool.
Oh my God!
And I don't have time for it now, but someday I'd like to. I've written 35, 40 pieces, but I'd like to leave a nice little body of work.
Yeah. So final question.
Yeah.
Putting you on the spot.
Yeah.
It's November of 2024.
Yeah.
Who's our next president?
I have no idea. I don't know that, as we sit here today, if it's between Biden and Trump, I think it's probably Biden. It's likely Biden. I don't necessarily think it's going to be between Biden or Trump. Things, a month, 2 months, 3 months is a long, long time in politics. We don't take the first vote on this thing until early February of 24. So it's less than a year away, but it's still almost a year away.
If you're on the Democrat side, national politics, who are you wanting to?
Man, they've got a real problem on their hands. Yeah. If Biden insists on running, he's very unpopular. Even more unpopular is Kamala Harris. I don't see how he gets Kamala Harris off of the ticket. So it's going to be a Biden-Harris ticket. And when you're 82 years old, the vice president, that really matters. So there's got to be a concern on the Democrats about that possibility. Trump, Carrie Lake. I mean, I don't know what.
Seriously.
Oof.
I mean,
but these primaries, this is illustrative of the kind of choices this primary system we have is giving us. I wish more people would vote in primaries.
So, and I know that I said that was our last question, but I'm so intrigued by this because you've been on the inside. We haven't.
Right.
How does this work? Let's keep it on the Republican side, and you say we've got this Trump problem.
Mm-hmm.
How do people within the national GOP structure navigate that? They don't. And say, we really want you, DeSantis. We really want you, Nikki Haley. We really want you, Asa Hutchinson, whatever.
That's how it used to work.
And so
that's how it used to work. When the party bosses, they kind of controlled a lot of the folks that ran the grassroots organizations and they certainly controlled the big donors. They could kind of steer the ship a little bit, and people don't like that. I get it. But the whole goal of a political party is to win elections.
Yes.
And it's the only goal. And so nominating somebody that can't win an election is the worst possible thing you can do. But a lot of the voters don't necessarily care about that. They want to make a statement. They want to have, and the levers of power that used to exist for party leaders just don't exist any longer. And
so how do the Democrats answer that then? If they have a Biden problem, this is different because it's a sitting president.
Right.
If he really does want to run and you're concerned as a Democratic operative on the national stage, how do you navigate around that?
There's not much you can do about it.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
I mean, you could send somebody. It would have to be done at a very human level, very quietly, in a very small room. I've had those conversations with not for president, but for governor before, where you explain it's not going to happen. They could have chosen to ignore that. Fortunately, they didn't. But that's how it would have to happen. It would have to happen on a very one-on-one, very respected people. The analogy would be Barry Goldwater going to Richard Nixon saying, Dave Simons is going through Memphis. You need to resign. Yeah. Right. In case you weren't with us at the start, go back and rewind. That kind of senior states person, party
it was Tulsa,
leader.
By the way.
Oh, it was Tulsa. There you go. Okay. Yeah. Memphis is. So, that could happen, but it's got to be persuasive. And could I see Joe Biden listening to that thoughtfully and saying, maybe you're right? Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, I can too.
I can't see Donald Trump listening to that.
No.
So there you have it.
And that's just a history of it. So anyway. Yeah. Well, John Hancock, this has been a real pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time. This is going to be a very interesting year plus as we head into 24. And I would love to have you back. It may be a shorter episode because we don't have to do all the behind-the-scenes personal background stuff. Yeah. But I would love to get your viewpoint when this is all
Happy to do it.
Okay. John, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and please forward the link to this podcast to friends, family, neighbors, even strangers. They'll thank you later. If you'd like more information on our wealth management team, just go to your search engine and type in Simons and Cordes, SIMONS and CORDES, Simons and Cordes, and the website will be the first thing that pops up. I'll talk to you again soon on the next episode of the Simon Says podcast.